Is that what it is? That's the button to push. We both have it on our devices, so I think we're sort of just watching that. All set? Real good. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to open this Division 3 House Finance work session scheduled for 1 o'clock today in the calendar and posted outside the door on Senate Bill 499. That's relative to reduction of hunger for children, older adults, and people with disabilities. So just to sort of give the landscape here before we begin, I am Representative Maureen Mooney of Merrimack, the Vice Chair of Division 3. I'm sitting in as the chair for this work session and also the work session at 2 o'clock. Absent today is Representative Edwards and also Representative Wallner. In place of Representative Edwards is Representative Leon. Welcome back and thank you.
Thank you.
And then we'll head right into the history of Senate Bill 499. So looking back at the docket, Senate Bill 499 was in the Senate Health and Human Services Committee. It came out of that committee 5-0. Came out of then the Senate Finance Committee 7-0. Came out of the Senate with an ought to pass with amendment on a voice vote. When it came to the House, it was actually vacated by the chairman of the House Education Committee on a voice vote on March 28th. So when this bill came over, it was offered essentially to the House Education Committee. As I read the docket, it was vacated, and then it came directly to Finance, and then here to Division 3. Last week, there was a joint meeting between Divisions 2, which oversees the education portion of the budget, and Division 3. And we met for probably a little over an hour on House Bill 499, taking in very helpful testimony on those that were interested and those that had information. After that meeting, there was an understanding that Division 2 would meet separately on the education portion of this bill, because it is in two parts. It's a education piece, and then there is a elderly affairs piece. It was decided Division 2 would meet on the education piece, and Division 3 would meet on the elderly affairs piece. Subsequent to that meeting, the Division 2 meeting did not take place. As I understand, there was agreement that they would not meet. I don't know the details fully, but that's what happened. So now here we are at our scheduled time on Senate Bill 499. We may recall the meeting, the work session from last week, and it was very detailed. And there's a lot to this bill in terms of both cost, the fiscal note in various categories, the policy contained within about the different programs being proposed. It is complex, and now it comes to us who will give a recommendation. Our job today is to give a recommendation for the full Finance Committee, House Finance Committee, to take a vote on. Incidentally, too, I just want to mention that all of these bills have to be out by May 16th. So here we are with that background and the understanding of what occurred since our last meeting. Does anyone want to say anything or add anything to anything I've said? Representative Tulersky.
I don't know if this would be a question for you as the sitting chair or the chair of finance, but how is this actually going to work in terms of each division coming out with a recommendation and then how we bring it to the full committee? Do you have any clarity on that?
They split the bill up, and so Division 2 is going to bring their piece of it, and then Division 3 will bring their piece of it, and we'll vote on them separately.
Similar to like divide the question on the floor?
Yeah,
Okay. So can I ask a question though on that?
sure.
Procedurally?
Point of clarification. Are you sure about that?
Yeah, that's
My understanding was different. the education committee had passed it up to us.
No, we're talking about Division 2 and Division
Division
3.
two.
Division two,
Division three.
Division two, sorry.
They're gonna
Division two.
make recommendations. It's gonna be on the calendar we're gonna vote on with two different pieces.
Okay, but
They've already amended it, so in effect, we're voting on amendments.
right, but it's a single bill, and as I think Representative Talarski was pointing out, if it's going to be two different pieces, it needs to be split on the floor, correct?
No, if what I was informed of first is the amendment was going to eliminate the first half, and then we'll have the second half in another amendment, and that's what will be, probably come before the full committee.
Okay.
So can you actually clarify that a little further about the first half of the bill so we can understand where we're at and so the people in the audience will understand what happened to the first half of the bill?
Well, a couple of things on that. I don't know if Division 2 has plans before the 15th or before we meet as a full House Finance Committee to meet again on this bill. That I do not know. And I think that goes to a huge part of your question. I know that the bill is in our possession. I also know that we can start the discussion right away, leading to what Representative Weiler was talking about. An amendment is going to be proposed that Representative Edwards has organized with regards to the second half of the bill. So why don't we distribute that amendment now, if we could, Mr. Ripple? So this is Amendment 2024-1650H. And I'm familiar enough with it in a meeting I had with Representative Edwards to be able to describe it. Okay. While everyone is reviewing it, this is essentially what the amendment does. In the bill, as we start with the human service section, so that's on page 3, section 4, line 6. There is a provision in here that would simplify the elderly SNAP application for participating in the Elderly Simplified Application Project with the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. There was discussion that this is a critical piece of the bill because it would allow those who access this application to not have to continuously reapply, which has become quite cumbersome, and it sounds like that's rather urgent in terms of this particular section of the bill. So the amendment before you would replace the entire bill with just that portion, with just that section 4 on page 3. The appropriation then would be the sum of $37,500 ending fiscal year June 30th, 2025, in order to streamline that application process for those that need that elderly simplified application. So that is the amendment, essentially addressing the Division 3 part of this bill. And again, you'll notice that it replaces the entire bill. So as for the Division 2 portion or the education portion, that would not be included in our recommended version. Representative Priest.
Thank you for taking my question. Again, for clarification, you're basically striking out all of the bill that relates to school-aged children and disabilities and replacing this that just pertains to the elderly.
Correct. Representative Stringham.
So the HHS portion of the bill had two specific sections that we were to address. One of which appears unchanged, which is the change of eligibility or requalification for the SNAP program. The $37,500 is consistent with the figure that we were told would be needed to implement that. And in fact, we were told that because of reduced paperwork and so on, with people not having to requalify, we may end up actually finding that to be even much more money. We may actually save money in the long run by having a 3-year versus a 1-year requalification. So what is taken out, so really what this bill is, it's not about this part, which is the same as the original bill and was passed unanimously in the Senate. But what this takes out is the whole summer EBT program. The EBT program provides some supplemental funds for children in need over the summer at the rate of, I think, $10 a week that loads onto a card. The money for running that part of the program comes from a federal government, but the money that we would need to appropriate is putting in the infrastructure necessary for us to be able to implement that program, which was something like $780,000, or maybe slightly less than that. But in that ballpark. So I really think the discussion for us as Division 3 ought to be about the EBT program and whether that's something that we want to match the Senate and support, or whether it's the position, the recommendation that we would make to the full committee to jettison that. So if we don't want to jettison it, then we just don't accept this amendment. Vote down this amendment, assuming it's even introduced. I think right now we're just discussing it, and it's not formally being done. The other thing that you're talking about, I'm a little confused of how the DOE part of it would get put back into the bill. My guess is that they would amend this amendment and put back in all the elements of the first section when they meet, or we do it at full finance committee. Somehow this bill has to get put back together if it's torn apart in sections. So in terms of the EBT program, I thought it sounded pretty reasonable, and I was inclined to support it. So, in general, I don't think this particular amendments needs to be put forward. But I'll just throw that out to get started.
Thank you for that. And that does lead to further clarification. So Section 4 of the bill, page 3, begins on line 6. However, there are 2 paragraphs there. One does relate to summer EBT, the other to the elderly simplified application. This amendment, 1650H, is only including the elderly simplified application part of Section 4, Senate Bill 499. Representative Hole.
Sure. Thank you. So I'm looking at the fiscal note for this, and I believe I heard testimony relative to all the sections of this bill that were not funded with general funds or were funded at a single dollar, that the Department of Ed could not implement those policies during that. And I granted that section of the bill is over with Division 2, but I do believe we heard that none of those policies could be implemented because we did not fund those in this bill. This question's either for the chair or for Mr. Ripple, right? The $4.99, right? The reduced lunch, that was still during the academic year, correct? That was not during the summer.
That's correct, yes.
So I don't believe there was any funding for the summer EBT cards in this program, correct?
There is funding for the summer EBT program. It's an open warrant to HHS in the language currently, and that's.
Thank you.
Yeah. And that was estimated at about 1.1 million in fiscal 25.
Thank you.
Representative Weiler.
When we first went through the bill, there were a lot of loose ends because the school lunch program now is basically funded mostly by the federal funds, up to 185% of poverty. This was going to go much further. They didn't give us a good count of how many people that would involve. I look in my notes, I don't see anybody identifying a number, and I don't see it in the fiscal note of, it's kind of open-ended. And why are we deciding that this whole new group needs to be funded? And at that point, there would be no federal help because they would only help up to 185%. Then anything we want to do above that, we're on our own, and it would all be state funds from Education Trust Fund or wherever. And do we really have that big a hunger problem in this state? That I don't think they properly prove such things, nor could they put a number on it, nor could they. And then some of these things like after the bell. So there are some children that must be having a free breakfast. And then there's other children that come in after the bell, and that whole arrangement of who was going to, what was the type of food? Was it going to be in a refrigerator? Were they going to pick it up going down the hall to their homeroom? Or how was it going to work out? And that wasn't carefully thought out. Was it going to be warm? Was it going to be cold? Could anybody just grab it on their way? You weren't really picking out who could take it and who couldn't, unless you want to have employees everywhere to make sure the right people got the right food. And it just seemed to needlessly complicate everything without really spelling out how it would be done. It just seemed like it wasn't a well-developed bill. At one point, the chairman of Division 2 said, this sounds like it needs to go to interim study. And he was pretty sure there was, as was I, there was a lot of loose ends. And I don't think he wanted to move forward with what he had. Anyway, that was why we thought of, all right, there is one good piece in here. That's taking the 1-year renewal to 3-year renewal, and that's worth keeping. And that's basically what the amendment does.
Representative Telersky.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. With all respect to Chairman Weiler, the section that this division is supposed to address has nothing to do with the school lunch program during the school year. That was the Division 2's focus. Our focus is solely on summer EBT, which has nothing to do with the Department of Education and Division 2, and the simplified elderly application. Now, with that, I'm wondering if it's possible to have New Hampshire Hunger Solutions perhaps come and help us understand a little bit. I was chatting with Ms. Milliken last week about how some of this, what's left in the bill, what we're looking at, and exactly what it is that we're looking at and how it's funded. Is there any way that we could do that?
Yes, I think that's in order. But would you mind if I just recognize Representative Leon
Thank you.
prior to recognizing? Thank you. Representative Leon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry that I'm just jumping into this and I wasn't in your previous meetings, but I know in my town in Derry, there's several locations where they offer the lunches during the summer to children and those who qualify for them. Would this summer EBT program replace that so that instead of having those lunches available at the fairways and other locations, it would simply be added to the EBT?
Representative Telersky.
Those summer programs are oftentimes nonprofits and not affiliated with DHHS. The summer school program has a lunch program for those students who are enrolled in summer school. That's different. Summer EBT, as I'm sure someone could help enlighten us with more specifics, is simply an additional SNAP program that families would receive for children who qualify for the year-round program. Was $40 a month.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, Ms. Milliken.
Hello, good afternoon. I did do a one-pager on summer EBT. I also included the elderly simplified application, but if I may pass that out. So one of the things that I think is a bit confusing is that there are several federal programs that provide options for schools and community-based programs to feed kids in the summer. And Summer EBT is a new federal program. It's a much more direct way of ensuring that children who are under 185% of poverty can access meals in the summer. It's just $40 per child per month in the summer months. So it's $120 per child per summer. And it comes to the family on an EBT card, just like SNAP, that can only be used to buy food. So that's how summer EBT works. There are some schools offer programs in the summer for families to be able to send their children to programs, and they would get meals while they're there. Those are and those are great where they are, but they're not everywhere. There really are lots of gaps across the state. And many times families can't get their children to the place where the meals are being provided. So it's just a much more direct way of making sure that children are not hungry in the summer. Children who during the year eat free and reduced meals would get additional dollars on the EBT card so that they would not be hungry in the summer. And just to be clear on the cost, I will defer, of course, to my colleague at DHHS, but I believe they testified that most of the cost is a one-time cost, just under $900,000, or one-time cost for the electronic changes that need to be made in their system. And the ongoing cost is much lower, under $300,000 a year. And just the benefits for children, for families, are 100% federal. So this would be bringing quite a lot of federal dollars into the state, and I've provided some estimates on the sheet that I handed out. So,
Representative Leon.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that information. So the summer food service program with the USDA is what we have in my town. If a family had that, would they also then get these additional EBT benefits where they're getting federally funded meals in one location and then also getting these additional EBT dollars?
they could get both. And just to be clear, it's $40 per child per month, the EBT. So I don't, it's not a lot of money.
Representative Weiler.
So family at this income level is also qualified for food stamps, are they not?
Yes, that's right.
And doesn't the food stamp provide for each child?
Well, food stamps, the average payment for food stamps for a meal doesn't cover the average cost of an actual meal in any county in New Hampshire. I'm happy to provide you with those data. But while SNAP is incredibly helpful to families, it's generally not enough to meet their needs. Most families run out of SNAP benefits, by the second or third week of the month. So it's incredibly helpful to families to be able to have their children eat breakfast and lunch at school during the year. And during the summer, the federal government has created this new program to ensure that they can access food in the summer as well.
It seems like we're duplicating all this administration when an increase in one would have taken care of it rather than having two or three other programs, because the town will have a program, SNAP will have a program, food stamps has a program. It just seemed to, if you increase one place, then it would all be centralized and we wouldn't have so much money of the program spent on administration.
I would love to see families have one program that met all their needs. That would be lovely. But unfortunately, the funding streams are what they are. So the federal government has provided these funding streams. And to my mind, it doesn't make sense not to use them to feed hungry kids. It's a lot of federal dollars that would be brought into the state, about 4.5 million. The return on investment is just like SNAP. It's invested in the local economy, so it stimulates the local economies. And if this bill doesn't pass, the department has testified that they're not going to be able to participate in the program for this year and also for next year. Those are federal dollars that will be left on the table.
Okay, we're going to go Representative Tulersky, then Priest, then Whole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Milligan, for being here and helping us break some of this down. Can you just clarify that I'm reading this correctly? That your data shows there are 37,329 children living in poverty that would qualify for this, that potentially don't have enough money for food.
That number is from the Department of Education. That's how many children are currently enrolled in free and reduced meals. So that's who would be eligible for this, for the summer program, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here. My first question was addressed by your response about the 37,000 children that would qualify for the summer EBT. Do you also have a number of the elderly and people with disabilities in which this program, in its original state, would benefit?
So the Elderly Simplified Application Project would make it easier for older adults and people with disabilities who have no earned income, who have fixed incomes, to qualify for SNAP. I don't have exact numbers of how many people it would help. I have some estimates, which I've included. But I would say that currently, participation in SNAP by older adults in New Hampshire we're the third lowest in the country for participation. So, in thinking about this bill, the sponsors really wanted to do something that would encourage older adults to be able to access the benefits that they're already eligible for.
Thank you. So we heard earlier from Mr. Ripple that this is a $1.6 million cost, and I'm not sure I'm understanding how the federal government is going to be putting in the 4.5 million, roughly, or your estimated 4.5 million, and then the state's going to have to pick up some portion, but the notes I see look like it's 50% of the administrative cost, and I just can't reconcile those numbers. So can you help there?
Again, I certainly would defer to my colleagues at DHHS, but I would say that that what they have estimated for FY25 is 1.157 million, and of those, 890,000 are one-time costs. The ongoing cost is for 2026 is 259.5, and for 27 is 265.5. And that's for both. That's for the summer EBT, and it includes the Elderly Simplified Application Project.
Follow up.
Do we, or Mr. Ripple, do we have updated information on the financial side of this in terms of estimated costs?
No, and I don't believe the numbers from HHS have changed.
Okay.
But that information is correct. The administrative costs are funded 50-50 between the state and the federal government.
Okay.
At a $1.1 million first year cost and about 200 some odd thousand in subsequent years. But then the benefits themselves are fully federally funded.
No further question.
Okay, anything further for Ms. Milliken? Anything further? Ms.
Thank you.
Milliken? All right, thank you very much. Very informative, and I know you've spent a lot of time and effort on this bill. Thank you. Representative Whole.
Yes, since we've been discussing an amendment, I'd like to at least move the amendment for the purpose of discussion of 2024-1650H, which is Representative Edwards' amendment to modifying the bill for the purpose of at least having a discussion about it now.
And is that seconded?
I will second.
Okay. We're going to have Representative Erf as the recorded second. Would you like to speak to your motion, Representative Whole?
Sure. So I understand that there is potentially a lot of money that the federal government might have available, and I emphasize the word might relative to this presentation by New Hampshire Hunger Solutions. However, the federal government is very broke right now. So counting on somebody who's very broke to continue to write checks is a fraught mission. I do think we should try and fix some of the things relative to our elderly populations and make sure that they can continue for a longer period of time without having to re-enroll. And that cost of the $37,000 likely will be something that could potentially be a savings to the state in terms of administrative costs, which means a higher percentage of the benefits go to those we're trying to help and not to just covering overhead. So with that, I'd like to move the amendment.
Okay, the motion is the adoption of 1650, which was described and discussed earlier. Representative Hole's motion. Any further discussion on the motion of the adoption of the amendment? Representative Tulersky.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I will not be able to support the amendment for a number of reasons. Let me start. Number one, I am still entirely confused as to the process of dividing up a bill. The way I'm interpreting this, regardless of what the intentions are of Division 2 and Division 3 and whatever conversations were had from those two chairs, this one little piece of paper is going to completely throw away the rest of the bill, including the parts that we were not allowed to discuss. So for that reason alone, I cannot support the amendment because I do believe there is important, valuable information that we have not really dug into. It's the purview of Division 2. Second to that is I believe that the new federal summer EBT program is something that would be valuable to 37,329 children in this state that don't have enough to eat at home for whatever reason. If it's parents who are underemployed, if it's children who live in unique family situations with grandparents, with guardians. These are children that, due to no fault of their own, do not have healthy food in their kitchen cabinets and not enough of it. And I think that for this division to throw out an opportunity for a relatively small investment from the state to enable this opportunity to bring that extra benefit to families who are struggling is really unfortunate. So I will be voting against this amendment with the hopes of saving part of the original bill, and I hope my colleagues can join me.
Representative Priest.
I will also be voting against this amendment. I think
Mike?
I'm sorry. I will also be voting against this amendment because the fact that it's gutting the entire bill that's been coming over here from the Senate. And I live in an area, the city of Manchester, and I see this all the time when I'm doing walks in the neighborhood of the amount of poverty that's in Manchester. And when you consider that almost 40% of the children in Manchester is in this group, your heart kind of breaks. And the fact that this is a very low amount of money that we're asking for from the state to provide healthy foods for the children to get them through the summer months. And secondly, I think 37,000 is nothing to even address the elderly and the people with handicap and their food needs. So with those two reasons, I will be voting against this amendment.
Representative Hole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree that it's important to feed these families. My church is over in Auburn. We have a food ministry, meets multiple times a week. We funnel hundreds of thousands of pounds of food into the Manchester area every week. Well, every year, not every week. I also understand that our national government is broken in terms of debt. To quote Albert Einstein, compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it. We are at $34.5 trillion in debt, and by September we'll be at $35 trillion. We're at a point in the fiscal world where we will run aground financially. Every time we say the federal government funds something, we're counting on a check that we can't guarantee. And we have to be prudent about this. Are we as a state willing to write this check for the full amount of this money? Because if you're making a promise, somebody has to write the check at the end of the day. And right now, we are far more solvent, we in New Hampshire, than the federal government. A large portion of our state is funded by the federal government, but in general principles, we have a much better credit rating. We are much better in terms of fiscal sanity. Are we about to agree to approving the entire funding of this? Because the federal government doesn't have it. They're borrowing 100% of this.
Okay, any further discussion? Representative Stringham, and we're on the motion of adoption, amendment number 1650H, which would replace the entirety of Senate Bill 499. Representative Stringham.
Yeah, I'd like to ask my colleagues to vote this down because on a process basis as well as the other reasons as discussed. Division 2 has not met to discuss this. I understand the chair of Division 2 has problems with the items under the DOE portion. Our working plan was that we were going to split into two groups, come back together, and then at that point, if the bill needed to be amended, we would amend it as either the two divisions together or perhaps the entire Finance Committee. In Division 3, when we haven't meaningfully discussed any of the DOE portion or the more significant portion really of this bill, that there was a lot of work done. I think risks the entire process of doing what we can for those who are food short here in the state with programs with a lot of work done on them that may work out very, very well for us. So my suggestion on a more productive process is just discuss these two elements that are in the HHS portion. We can have an idea of where we want to go. It's obvious that the extension to the 3-year piece is unanimously supported, and there are pros and cons on the EBT portion of the bill. We walk out of here with a resolute idea of where we want to go, and wait till we re-meet with Division 2, or should our chair decide there's a better way, perhaps a full committee to meet to go through after Division 2 is met, that we do at this point. But to just discard all those different sections of the DOE piece just because some parts of it sounds like it's messy and it might not be ready, should go to interim study or something like that, and just discard it for the rest of this biennium, I think is short-sighted. So I'm going to vote against this amendment and recommend that we just talk through and prepare for the next session that the full committee decides to go with. Thank you.
Representative Tlarsky.
I would just like to say one last thing. From my colleagues on Division 2, I'm pretty sure they have no idea that this happened. They do know that their meeting was canceled today. And I have a real problem with the members of a division not being allowed to have a say over a policy that's been put to them and have someone else pull the rug out from underneath them. So to not allow those members to even be here, be part of this discussion, and to know that it's happening is just wrong. And I'm really sort of embarrassed that this is actually even happening right now. Thank you.
Okay, the motion is made by Representative Hole, seconded by Representative Erf, on the amendment number 2014-1650H. No further discussion. Let's call the roll. When ready.
So this is the motion is in favor of the amendment is 1650. Put forward by Representative Hole, seconded by Representative Erf. And we'll start with Representative Erf.
Yes.
Representative Hole.
Yes.
Representative Weiler.
Yes.
Representative Tolersky.
No.
Representative Stringham says no. Representative Priest.
No.
Representative Leon.
Yes.
And Chairman Mooney.
Yes.
Okay, and Representative Wallner being absent, the final vote is 5-3 in favor of Amendment 1650.
Okay, as a reminder, we are making recommendations to the full House Finance Committee. That is our purpose today. At this point now, we have a motion of an amendment that's just passed to replace the bill. Do we have a motion at this point, Representative Hole?
I move that we recommend passage as amended to the Finance Committee.
Second.
So that would be an ought to pass, an OTPA,
Yes.
to the Finance Committee with the amendment. Any further discussion? Representative Tolersky.
I'm just going to say again for the record, I am really unclear how we even got to this point. I am uncomfortable with the way this has played out, and I will be voting no. I think it's shameful that we are throwing the whole thing away, and we did not actually have a proper process to even get to this point. Please join me in voting no.
Representative Stringham.
Yeah, if anybody here can clarify, will Division 2 be meeting between now and the full Finance Committee meeting to discuss their portion of this bill?
I don't know.
I don't know.
So I intend to vote no, because I think the rest of the bill needs the kind of oversight that that the hard work done in the Senate entitles it to, and the importance for the potential recipients of the services from this bill.
Representative Priest.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I will also be voting no as to the reasons that have been expressed by my colleagues here about the process of how we have come to this point, and the fact that we are gunning this entire piece of legislation that's been worked on carefully by the Senate and replacing it with a $30,000 allotment, which doesn't really meet the needs of the approximate 100,000 people and 37,000 children that are in this poverty state and are needing SNAP benefits. And I just think it's inhumane, and maybe it's just my values, but I think it's inhumane. Thank you.
Okay. Representative Hole, are you?
Aye.
Okay. At this point, the motion on the floor is ought to pass with amendment. Representative Hole for discussion.
Yeah, if I may. I understand and hear the argument that it's inhumane to not feed people, but you cannot be generous with somebody else's money. There is a fundamental philosophy difference. Being generous means taking it out of your own account, donating food, helping with those directly. You cannot compel someone else to be generous. That's no longer generous. I hear your argument, but what we are doing is requiring other taxpayers to foot the bill when we do this. It is not about generosity at this point. Generosity starts when it comes out of your own piggy bank. Okay? We cannot compel someone else to fund this.
Okay. Representative Leon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I recognize that this first section is a Division Two issue. However, we do need to recognize that this whole part is about providing lunch to be eaten during instruction. If it's out, it seems that way. After the bell, so is it eating it at a recess period? When would you eat the food that's after the bell? I guess maybe we're getting into the weeds, but I have 3 young boys who cannot concentrate while they are eating. I'm just worried about the consequences on the actual instructional time. But I guess I probably went afield, and this is why that would be Division 2.
Representative Tulersky.
Representative Stringham, I was just going to say that that part of the bill is somewhat complicated and nuanced, which is why Division 2 is handling it. We had a whole discussion last week on what it means to have breakfast after the bell, and I don't think we're going to get into it now, so I don't think it's worth my time.
Representative Stringham.
Yeah, I think the fact that you brought up the questions that you did based on the read it shows the reasons why Division 2 needs to go through all the sections of that bill. I mean, we theoretically could do it. We haven't been tasked with do it. That's not what we came in here to do today. And, you know, I would hope that the homework that we laid out last week would continue. And thank you for your question to emphasize the importance of doing that.
This point, the motion is ought to pass with amendment. I think we're ready for the roll when the clerk is ready.
Boy, if I'm never ready, do we have to vote?
This is your chance.
Okay, this is a vote on House Bill 499 as amended with Amendment 1650. Motion put forward by Representative Hull and seconded by Representative Erf. Representative Leon,
Yes.
Representative Erf,
Yes.
Representative Hull,
Yes.
Representative Weiler,
Yes.
Representative Tulersky,
No.
Representative Stringham says no, Representative Priest,
No.
and Chairman Mooney.
Yes.
The vote being 5-3, with 1 no vote, the motion passes.
Okay, the motion passes, ought to pass with amendment. The amendment is again number 1650H. As I mentioned, this bill is due out of the full House Finance Committee
By 5-16.
May 16th. That's my reading. So, a lot of good discussion. Naturally, we'll see if Division 2 adds anything to the conversation or any amendment and so forth with regards to the portion that was assigned to them. But as for Division 3, it looks like we have a position. At that point, or at this point, I'm going to close the work session on Senate Bill 499. We'll meet again at 2 o'clock for work session on Senate Bills 406 and 311. This session's closed. Okay, seeing as though the time is precisely the stroke of 2 o'clock, we'll start our next work session, Senate Bill 406. Senate Bill 406, an act making an appropriation to the Department of Health and Human Services to increase rates for shelter programs. By means of some background, this bill passed Senate Health and Human Services Committee 5-0, Senate Finance with amendment 7-0, and came from the full Senate, again on a voice vote. We met last week as a Division 3 work session to begin discussion on Senate Bill 406. At that work session, there were specific questions asked of Katia Fox, who has responded to them in written format. It was emailed to us today. But I think after we'll take any initial member input, we'll have Ms. Fox come up and discuss her letter. So, anything from the members to open Senate Bill 406? Okay, Ms. Fox, when you're ready.
Good afternoon. I'm Katia Fox. I'm the director of the Division for Behavioral Health, and thank you for having me this afternoon. I do realize that I got the responses in writing, which yay, I got them in writing. However, you just received them and may have not had time to go over them. I do have hard copies if anybody would like a hard copy. Oh, okay. All right. So the first question that was asked was there was some discussion about the language around requiring us to prioritize veterans. What I can share with you this afternoon is that the shelter system does a really good job in serving this particular population today. So this language will reinforce that emphasis and prioritization on veterans. And so as you can see in the response, there are specific programs and areas that address the veterans, and those include specific outreach and specialized programs to address this population, along with the training that is necessary to assist. And so we're well poised to be able to implement that portion of the bill. And we also, as you can see, we have in our database, we are able to provide the numbers that we're currently serving in our shelter system. And so there have been 33 individuals who identified themselves as veterans who are receiving those services. The next question was about not legally present and how were we going to be able to implement that. That is a very good question, and it is very difficult. And as you heard from the shelter programs last week, that there are many people who do not have identification, so we don't have necessarily the hard proof whether they're here legally or not. However, we do not want that to be a barrier for entry into shelter, because we do know that shelter is the first line of defense in harm reduction and prevention services for those individuals. And so again, we know that there are shelters that work very closely, and their case managers work with those individuals seeking shelter services to get them connected to services. And the first thing they need to do is help them obtain some type of identification to apply for those services. And then Chairman Edwards had asked about some ideas around a House resolution that he would like to put forth. And so we know that the Housing and Urban Development, our federal funder, provides funding for a variety of different programs. However, they do not support our shelter system. So we would like to see that as a possibility to have federal funding for what seems to be an ongoing and potentially increasing issue, as we talked about last week, with our housing shortages. And then there was a question about the rate and how do we come to the rates? And so you can see the formula here. We have beds times dollars times days of the year and the total funding. And frankly, as we talked about, when we increase the funding from $8 to $20, we back into the number of the dollars that we have that are appropriated for these services. And with this bill, again, it would increase it to $27 per diem or per bed. And those are my responses for what was posed last week.
Okay, thank you. So $27 would be the result of passage of this bill, but the last budget brought us from $8 per bed to 20.
Yes,
Thank you.
that's
Any
correct.
Any questions?
I
Representative,
do, but Chairman Weiler has one.
I'm sorry, Chairman Weiler.
I had notes from before that there's 950 beds across the state, but I don't have down how many separate agencies that we're keeping track of that provide these.
Yes, there are 13 agencies
Thank
that
you.
we fund and that are contracted with us. Of those, one of them is the New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, and they have 10 programs under them. So you take that, you end up with 23 shelters.
Thank you.
Representative Stringham.
I had one other question just about the nature of the contracts with the 13 agencies before, and I was wondering if you have any clarification, in particular, whether the contract in general anticipates that the state will pay the fair cost and that the amount is was done as an estimate, or exactly, what is the appropriate state portion of the bed costs for this program?
So I think if I understand your question, we typically do not, there is no provision that I'm aware of that requires us to reimburse the shelter programs for 100% of their costs. And as they talked about last week, they have other funding sources, which is primarily fundraising and through grants. So beyond that, the state of New Hampshire is their primary source of funding at 100% general funds because, as I said, they're not eligible for the federal funding under HUD. I hope that answers your question.
I guess it does. I mean, I know in some other programs, we never guarantee cost, but sometimes the rate that we agree to pay is based on some kind of predetermined understanding of what is appropriate. And we've seen things that programs have turned out to be so expensive, they've been difficult for us to continue with after they're in place for a while. So, I'm just trying to grapple with how do we decide, $8 wasn't enough. It looks like $20 is not enough. What probably $45 is definitely enough, which is the cost. So, are we deciding on 27 because $2.5 million is just as big a bite as we think is appropriate for this, or, why are we at 27? So that's why some of the questions about the nature of the contract were asked. And I now understand that's not irrelevant. There's no more value in discussing that part of it to help us with this decision. So any other add-ons to that at all?
No, just that I think we're getting a pretty good deal and that we're very fortunate that we have these shelter programs who are still willing to put themselves forth and provide these services. And they, as this was a competitive procurement, they were willing to come forth. And so we're getting a deal and they're willing to do it. And they're using other sources of funding in addition to what the state can provide. And I will say, though, that this does not grow the number of beds, and we believe that there's demand that we could increase our capacity, but we also want to preserve what we have and ensure that they are financially stable going forward.
Representative Hole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in the budget, we went from $8 to 20, which we've discussed. We're in the midst of an off-budget year level. I guess I understand that there was a recent RFP that went out, and you have that as data to use to show that there's a huge delta between the actual cost per bed per night and what we're reimbursing them at. But in an off year, when we're having trouble in terms of funding all the other programs, what pushes this one ahead of the pack?
So thank you for that question. I'm here to respond to what was put forth to us. This was not something that we put forth or requested that it be sponsored. So this came through the legislative process and the sponsors, not from the department.
Follow up then. Is there any reason why this couldn't be delayed up until next year's budget cycle to be included at that point?
I think that is a question that you should answer. And
Is
it's
there any
up-
technical, is
Yeah.
there any technical reason why it couldn't be delayed? It's a policy decision as opposed to an implementation decision.
Absolutely. So we can, if you gave us $500 million, we can implement it. But I do understand that there are a lot of demands that are on and pressures right now, especially in an off-budget year, and that we're could be facing a difficult budget session upcoming. So there'd be no guarantee that the department would be able to embed this in our budget and have it accepted as a prioritized need.
Follow up.
Follow up.
I think I heard you say 500 million. I think you meant 500,000, but please correct me.
I was just being facetious
Oh,
and
okay.
over the top. The
Yes. Okay.
the implementation mechanism would remain the same whether it's $5 or 2.5 million.
Representative Priest.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, for allowing me to acknowledge me, and thank you for being here and for your recent letter. You mentioned in a handout that New Hampshire has seen a 52% increase in homelessness from 2022 to 2023. Do you have any idea of what 2024 looks like?
That is a very good question and very timely. We have a point in time count that was taken in January, and those numbers are expected to be released momentarily. I don't have those numbers, so I would need to go back and be able to provide that if we have preliminary data. So I'm unable to answer that today, but I think just from our experiences and what we're seeing for the demand for shelter and what we're seeing in our cities and communities across the state, I think there's a lot of need out there.
As a follow-up, please.
Follow up.
And the fact that this is the largest percentage in the entire country, and it's still growing, and it's still a major problem for all of the major cities in New Hampshire.
Yes, I understand the housing costs in the New England region are extremely high and have pushed a lot of people into difficult situations.
Representative Hole.
We've talked a lot in Division 3 and DHHS relative to matches between federal and state. Is there any similar or analogous type situation where we do some sort of grant to these particular organizations with some sort of explicit or implied match where they say for every $2 you raise privately, we'll fund you at $1 or whatever. Is there any policies like that in the department already?
So I would need to defer to someone else from a department-wide perspective. Typically, when we see those matches, as you indicated, those are at the federal level, and the state's required to provide a match in kind or in hard dollars. In this particular case, these are organizations that are small for the most part, and it would be extremely difficult for them to be able to do that. So in this circumstance, I would find it really, really challenging, and that we would likely see them not to be able to continue to provide the services. But again, from a department-wide, I can't think of a situation where we require that.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Fox. Anything further for her? Okay. Oh, Representative Priest.
Yes. I was wondering if you have any estimates. You mentioned that we're just funding the 950 beds currently, but it doesn't take into account the additional people, the additional needs of veterans and families that are needing this service. Do you have any idea that's beyond the 950?
That is a great question that I don't have a response today. That's something I could come back with, where we do have data from the shelter programs over how often they're full and when. So from a capacity versus utilization, we could come back with that number to see where the difference is and what the real need would be if we were to expand those. And that might be something for consideration for the next session.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. White or others who are interested in chiming in on anything that's been said here? Okay. Okay. Senate Bill 406. One thing that does strike me is the fact that this increase was just provided a year ago. And here we are looking for an increase to that. So that's something that probably should be considered as we go forward with a recommendation to full finance. Representative Hole.
Yeah, given that we went from $8 to 20, an increase by 12, and here a year later we're looking for another $7 increase, or they're about 60% of that increase. I would move interim study or ITL on this at this point. I think this is a budget year item and it should be taken up next year. I'm willing to do either.
Representative Erf.
I'm willing to second either.
Do we have a coin?
I'll move ITL.
Okay, the motion's been made for ITL. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, seconded by Representative Erf. Representative Talarsky?
Oh, do I get to speak first? Is he going to speak to his motion, or are we good on where it's at?
Go ahead.
Yeah. That's weird that went off. I'm a little disappointed to hear a motion of ITL. Yeah, the amount was raised last budget cycle. However, I think we heard in testimony that the need is real. The need is extreme. And we have these different agencies that are busting at the seams, families, veterans, men and women. And although it is an off budget year, I think that the way this bill is drafted, very simply to give these agencies that increased assistance at this time, would be very needed. And that next year when we come back and write the budget, hopefully we'll be able to figure out a way to match that and give them the funding that they actually need to continue those services. So I'd be voting no on the ITL.
Representative Weiler, followed by Representative Priest.
We haven't even had a year to judge how much help the $20 increase has been over what I wrote down was a $7, I think. We went from 7 to 20. You had 8? You had 8? Anybody else have 8?
I had
All
8 starting and
All
now
right.
at 20.
Okay, but we don't even know the effects of that over the previous, over what has been a year since the budget passed, or less than a year. And plus, I think we're being a little bit in this bill, telling them what we think they should have for priorities when there's so many different ones. Each one has their own priority. Each one is organized a little differently. And I'm just grateful they're doing this and they're raising the money to do this. But I don't think we should step in like a bully and say, we'll tell you what to do when we're not even providing half. And as was pointed earlier, a lot of them don't have identification. So we're going to say you have to prove that you're a citizen, you have to prove that you're a veteran. And, you know, and I know the veterans are doing their best to do special programs for the veterans. So I think it's untimely to be putting all this in now when we don't even know what the $20 has done. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I will be voting against this ITL. Being a resident of the city of Manchester, I have seen personally how the homeless crisis has been expanding and increasing every year. And I see the number of people on the streets, in the parks, sleeping and being without beds and being without services and being without facilities. And it's getting worse. And this is just a penance to what we can do right now to the existing agencies that are providing services to these people. And therefore, I will be voting against this ITL.
Representative Stringham.
Yeah, I appreciate the testimony we've heard. You know, while we're not required to partially fund or fund these at any level, it is an essential service that we need to live in a civil society. There's many programs that we support that we gave significant increases to with this budget, this being one of them. We heard a considerable amount of testimony that even at these levels, that the many of these centers are having a difficulty maintaining staff or paying them appropriately, or and their skilled labor is making less than the local rate at fast food stores. And there's real concern that that we'll be dealing with a problem with this particular need of our vulnerable, where we probably need to increase beds, we might see decreased beds without this increase. So I intend to support it based on the testimony that we heard. I do know many of these facilities. I mean, I saw an ad for Families in Transition thanking all the money they received for people who ran in the Boston Marathon. I think that's great. I don't think that obviates the impact that a $2.5 million appropriation that we make could have on top of that. So I would support this bill that came out of the Senate unanimously, and do so here as well. Thanks.
Representative Hole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, there are some real needs. We've seen the devastating effects of an economy where inflation is significant. Cost of food and housing has gone through the roof. Those of limited means took it on the chin because those are two of the biggest categories that young families in particular and elderly are the ones, as a percentage of their overall budget, that's the area that got hit the hardest. And unfortunately, we don't capture some of that information in the CPI. I do think that trying to do this in an off-budget year is the wrong place and time. We should, in fact, plan for this. We just increased this by $12 over the prior one. a rather significant 150% increase over the prior amount. And now we're back again asking for another 60% increase in this category. That's a significant amount. If we had passed the House Bill 1560, we'd have more funds in the general fund to work with, but we left a significant amount of money in the education trust fund, and that will limit our ability to do things in the general fund going forward. I'm not sure who voted. There was no roll call votes on that bill, but I do know that that's going to handicap what we can do this year. And this might be the small price we have to pay to not have the money available in the general fund.
Okay. Thank you all for the discussion. I will be supporting the motion of ITL. I too agree that a jump from $8 to $20 in just a year's time is not enough time. Additionally, I received a phone call from a rather prominent citizen on this bill, supportive, and we spoke. And one thing I did mention is that this summer, of course, the departments are already putting together their budgets for next year. It doesn't take long before the next thing you know, drafters are at their desk working. And it's something certainly that DHHS should take a look at for next year when the draft proposal of a budget is introduced. With that, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll on ITL Senate Bill 406 when ready.
The bill is SB 406, the motion ITL by Hull, seconded by Erf. Representative Leon.
Yes.
Representative Erf.
Yes.
Representative Hole.
Yes.
Representative Weiler.
Yes.
Representative Tulersky.
No.
Representative Stringham says no. Representative Priest.
No.
Chairwoman Mooney.
Yes.
The vote being 5-3, the recommendation to the full committee is ITL.
Okay. Moving now to work session on Senate Bill 311. And that's an act relative to property tax offset for the town of Hampstead and making an appropriation therefor. This bill, by means of some background, was approved by Senate Finance 7-0, adopted by the full Senate on a voice vote. With that, I'll open it to discussion. I don't think we have any additional information other than what was discussed at last week's work session. Representative Weiler.
I did talk to Commissioner DAS, Charlie Arlinghouse, and I said, you were quoted as saying that the state never made any payments for property tax to any town. And I said, I think you're wrong. I recall the Connecticut Lakes dam things where they had floodplains that were affecting 6 different towns. And they promised the towns that if you'd forbid any development in the floodplains because of the dams are going to put up to save Massachusetts from flooding, we will pay you the losses in the property tax that you would have had. And I recall that distinctly because it was something that the new Attorney General had to sue the state of Mass. They were supposed to also chip in and pay these property tax losses to those 6 towns. And they finally did. But in the meantime, New Hampshire was paying both the share by the state of New Hampshire and the state of Massachusetts. So I think those are still ongoing. And Charlie said, well, I didn't know that. I'll look it up. And hasn't got back to me yet. But to say that this has never happened before, I think is wrong, because that was a perfect example of what it was. And your loss of property tax was made up by the state and the state of Massachusetts. So I'm in favor of this. And I think that there were several years that it was done. And not only that, but some of the people in Hampstead say, you know, we never would have allowed this in our town. We would have made problems and made a big fuss if we weren't at least going to get paid back for the property tax loss. So I think we owe it to the people that made the deal initially and that chose Hampstead, and I'm in favor of paying this money out. Thank you.
Representative Priest.
Yes, I would be in favor of SB 311, but the question that I have, is this a one-time payment or is this going to be continuing every year? It wasn't clear that I could find. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to call Mr. White up too. I do have a question myself. Perhaps that one we can sort of stock these up so you can answer them all together. Representative Talarsky? Okay. So my question was sort of related to Representative Priest's. At the last work session, I recall 2 payments have been made already to Hampstead. So at some point, when you answer my question, Representative Priest's, could you address just how those came to be? Thank you.
Sure. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Nathan White, CFO of Department of Health and Human Services. The way that the language is crafted within this bill here, this would be a one-time payment for state fiscal year 2025, which was consistent with the intent of the Senate. The department has made 2 prior payments via the Governor and Executive Council. They weren't technically contracts, they were unencumbered payment requests in the amounts of approximately $176,000, $177,000 and change. The reason why we made those payments is, as Representative Weiler had indicated, there were many conversations going on during the time in the fall of 2021 and the spring of 2022, prior to the June 8th, 2022 acquisition of Hampstead Hospital, whereby the state was agreeing to make those payments to offset the impact to the tax loss for the town.
Is it too premature to ask if this will be a permanent fixture in the upcoming budget, or are there plans to do that?
I think that's one of the questions that this committee is here addressing today. It's I mean, ultimately, whether the state intends to continue to make payment to the town in perpetuity is really, I mean, it's a pretty significant policy decision. The state has done so with the city of Concord, recognizing the loss of parking revenue that they lose on an annual basis.
Okay, thank you. I recall from the testimony last week, the town of Hampstead has had to hire 2 police officers because of calls and so forth that have occurred as a result of the state hospital now located there. So I guess you're right. Making this a permanent fixture would take a lot of discussion in terms of what exactly that money year to year would be expended on. But as was mentioned, that's not really the issue before us. What's before us is approximately $191,000 to cover their costs and offset significant personnel changes the town has had to make to help the state out. Any further questions for Mr. White? Okay, with that, I'll entertain a motion on Senate Bill 311. Representative Stringham,
Yes, I'll make a motion of ought to pass.
is there a second? Representative Erf for a second. Any discussion, starting with Representative Stringham?
While I do agree with others, the issues of whether to make a permanent pilot as part of state policy is a bigger discussion. I think we should be very comfortable making this one-time appropriation for the town of Hampstead. That's in a very critical position as we reorganize and some of our youth detention programs and the importance of the facility that they have. So I think the appropriation is reasonable, both for us and for the town, and therefore I put forward the motion of ought to pass.
Representative Talarsky.
Thank you. I'll be honest, I have some problems with the precedent that this sets. not because they don't deserve the tax payment. I'd like to know that moving forward, if the state is in this position of acquiring property, that this discussion would be part of a deal. It seems like in testimony, we heard lots of conversations happen, lots of promises were made, public hearings, maybe things were discussed, but no one produced a written agreement that the state would be responsible for ongoing tax payments. I understand that's the situation we're in. I think it's sort of unfortunate. I think it was messy and someone dropped the ball. I do wish, to echo my friend over there, it's not a budget year. They could have come in, we could have maybe seen it. I believe the testimony was the Senate took it out. I don't recall actually. No, okay, I take it back. Refresh my memory.
To clarify, during the Senate phase, Senate Finance voted to add it on an oral vote, voice vote, to add money into the budget for this year. And the department, for the first state fiscal year 24, the department went through and went ahead and took general funds to try to be reflective of that. And then we had conversations with Senator Birdsell requesting that a bill be brought forward to be consistent with that vote, so that we had legislative authorization to move forward with that, consistent with what was voted on.
Okay. So again, conversations that were had as opposed to actually having it, a concrete deal at the beginning, having it in the budget as a regular ongoing expense. I think it's unfair to the town to keep them in this limbo, knowing that next year we're going to have to come back and fight this battle again. I will be supporting the motion with some reservations as to how this played out and the precedent it sets moving forward. I just wanted to make that known.
I too will support ought to pass. One detail that has not come up in this conversation is that this 100 acres in Hampstead, now owned by the state, will be the future home of the Youth Detention Center.
Yes.
I'm sure there'll be much more on this to come. Representative Hole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We can't fix the past, unfortunately, and I fully agree with my member across the way that this should have been addressed in whatever contractual negotiations that happened. I do think we could amend this to make it clear that the legislative intent is this not to go forward, because my biggest concern is not the $100 and whatever thousand for the current hospital. It's when we build the Sununu Center for another $21 million, and now this annual payment has blossomed from 170,000 to 350,000 or something. I'm going to be voting no. If there was an amendment that made it really clear that this was to address a one-time issue relative to what happened during the budget cycle, and that this is not to be expected going forward, I could support it.
Okay, with that, we're ready to call the roll. The motion is ought to pass as a recommendation to the full House Finance Committee on Senate Bill 311 when the clerk is ready.
All right, the motion is ought to pass. Representative Leon.
Yes.
Representative Erf.
Yes.
Representative Hole.
No.
Representative Weiler.
Yes.
Representative Tulersky.
Yes.
Representative Stringham votes yes. Representative Priest.
Yes.
Chairwoman Mooney.
Yes.
The vote being 7-1. 7-1. The motion passes.
Okay, ought to pass, recommended to the full House Finance, Senate Bill 311. Anything to close our work session today? Mr. Ripple,
I have nothing.
thank you. Representative Tulersky?
Thank you very much. I just want to have a moment of privilege here to say that what happened with Senate Bill 499 earlier really distresses me. There are lots of questions about process that I feel were not handled properly. I would really like to go back and look at the tape of the first public hearing and when we decided we were going to divide that bill after, maybe it happened after the first work session, I can't remember. But I believe that we were presented with a plan for that bill that we all came here today expecting. Well, some of us apparently came here expecting a plan today. And it was completely upended. There were members, my colleague, I didn't realize Representative Murray on Division 2 was here. She knows nothing about the plan for that bill in Division 2. I feel like that was dishonest. It was a posted meeting today that was then, half of it was pulled down without any explanation. And I would just like to publicly express my disappointment of how that whole matter played out. Thank you very much for giving me a moment.
Okay, so noted. All right. With that, we will end our work session today. There is no doubt, I will say, no doubt we are taking on very heavy, sensitive issues. Hunger, homelessness, nobody takes these lightly. Our job is to diligently work as members of House Finance in an off-budget year and review each bill to the best of our abilities. With that, I'm going to close the work sessions scheduled for today, Division 3. Thank you.